Archives of Prasar Bharati presents the timeless treasure of golden era.
Hello and welcome to Living on the Edge. This week we travel to the Keoladeo National Park in Rajasthan to see why it's coming under threat. Analyze the impact of work environments on worker health and well-being, reveal the lesser known side of everyday birds, and take a look at another world environment problem. At the top of this week's program is a visit to Bharatpur in Rajasthan. Last month, a group of international experts met there to evolve a comprehensive wetland policy for India. But what exactly are wetlands and why are they under threat? Sunil Manoharan reports using the Keoladeo National Park as a case study.
These Siberian cranes at the Keoladeo National Park were bred in captivity in the Jaipur Zoo. For the second consecutive year now, they have been awaiting the arrival of their wild cousins from Siberia. The idea behind the experiment was to allow locally bred Siberian cranes to mingle with the wild Siberian crane population to increase the numbers of this highly endangered species of birds.
I have a feeling that it is too late. We should have started at least 5 years ago the whole thing. We should blame ourselves for all this. But we will not give it up. We have to try because there is a possibility of these birds going along with the common grain. This may not go because it's too old. So what we are trying is we should get the first year bird, 5 months old bird.
Yet another program that we have planned at Bharatpur is a visitor interpretation program.
To combat problems such as this one, the Worldwide Fund for Nature and the Ministry of Environment and Forests had organized a workshop on wetland management. Experts from India and abroad met there to evolve a comprehensive management policy on wetlands.
Well, I think it's very significant, particularly here in India, because this is the first workshop of its type. And developing a management approach and a policy approach is basic for every nation, and this is the beginning.
And the area where the workshop hopes to make a new beginning is on the question of wetlands. Over the years, the role of wetlands has become increasingly important. Wetlands are 3.5 times more productive than an average piece of land, as they store water for most of the year. And the nutrient load received through rivers provide food for the birds. Besides, it also recharges groundwater in the area, which becomes very vital during drought years for the 1.5 million inhabitants of the area.
I'm sure that in a drier state like Rajasthan, people are very much aware of the importance of maintaining underwater ground levels, otherwise their wells drop. So a wetland often acts like a sponge, and times of heavy rain or monsoon, it sucks up the water and then gradually releases it in the drier parts of the year.
In fact, Bharatpur is a fine example of a viable wetland that needs to be protected.
Well, Bharatpur is known around the world. It's definitely a a world-class wetland site, known primarily because of the migratory birds.
Identifying the common species of birds and are excellent guides. But the surprising part of this ecosystem is that it is not totally natural. Till about 250 years ago, the Keoladeo National Park was a low-lying area where rainwater accumulated during the monsoons. The then Maharaja of Bharatpur built a number of small dams in the area so that water could be stored all year long. When the area became a permanent wetland, the number of birds visiting the area increased dramatically. And this became the hunting ground of the Maharaja and his guests. Even today, records of the Maharaja's hunting exploits stand in the middle of the national park and provide an ironic twist to the park's protected status today. And sometimes overprotection can be counterproductive, as planners discovered to their dismay. In 1982, the grazing of cattle was banned in the area. The decision proved disastrous.
Unfortunately, what happened from the very next year, 83, we find that entire, we could not see wetland. Water we could not see, the water surface, it is all covered with grass. It started choking the wetland. The Siberian crane which used to come here at a large number all those days, 1985, we found that 15 birds disappeared on January 15th. Because by that time we found that the habitat was not suitable for the Siberian crane. Because it was so thick.
The other major problem faced by the park is the use of pesticides in nearby areas. The polluted water has resulted in the death of many birds and the thinning of the eggshells of many endangered species.
We can only go in for education, and we have been talking to the villagers and trying to educate them. But the response which we get from them is that first they say that your birds, they are feeding on our vegetation and on our crops, and now you are saying or telling us not to use the pesticides.
It's only when the villagers, their animals and their birds are integrated into an effective wetland management system that the park's survival will be ensured. After all, people's participation in conservation is as important as the park itself, and far more important than just protecting a tourist site.
Before we go on to our next story, let's take a look at groundwater pollution. It's a problem particularly acute in our country. Sunil Manoharan reports.
Nearly 50 years after independence, over 340 million people in our country lack clean drinking water. And even those who manage to get it have to walk long distances of up to 20 kilometers a day. Unfortunately, one of the few sources of fresh water, known as groundwater, is being destroyed by short-sighted human actions. Toxic waste in garbage dumps and on land percolates into groundwater just as tea washes from a tea bag into a cup of hot water. And because groundwater is recharged by rain that seeps into the earth, the effect of rain filled with chemicals and pesticides seeping into the ground can be disastrous. Scientists estimate that in an area of 40 hectares, up to 308 million liters of rainwater becomes polluted and finds its way into groundwater. Even mines, which are the third biggest employers in the world today, pose serious problems. The waste suspended material called effluent ultimately finds its way into groundwater. Untreated industrial effluents, on the other hand, which contain acids and toxic metals, have devastating effects on people when groundwater is harnessed for drinking. Of all the water available to man, 97% is salty in the oceans and seas. 2% is locked in the polar ice caps, and only 1% is fresh water. Only fresh water can be readily accessed by man, and yet groundwater degradation is only increasing, leaving little clean water for hundreds of millions across the world. And until we are able to check this trend, not only will drinking water be a problem, but so will the health of our people.
From groundwater pollution to work environments. For most of us, pollution begins outside a factory's premises. To some, it's symbolized by smoke belching into the atmosphere, to others by drains filled with chemical effluents. But few stop to consider work environments usually hidden behind high walls where workers toil long hours without adequate safeguards. The owners of such industries are indifferent to the consequences of prolonged exposure to heat and dust, smoke and chemicals. And laws meant to protect workers lack teeth, as Priya Somaya found out.
Whether it's fleecing the carcass, cleaning the skin, or treating it with chemicals, workers in leather tanneries work amidst filth and stench and are exposed constantly to strong chemicals. Some years ago, a study showed that tannery workers ran an increased risk of bladder cancer. Besides, cases of ulcers, chronic bronchitis, and skin diseases have been reported in abnormally high numbers. It was found that many of the substances used to treat leather had strong chemicals, some even known to cause cancer.
चमड़े को जब आप सोच लीजिए गलाने वाला चमड़ा केमिकल जो है तो हम लोग तो जिंदा है मुर्दे को गला देता है तो जिंदा को गलाने में कितना देर लगेगा.
But the plight of tannery workers is not unique, let alone rare. Across the country, in tens of thousands of small and large factories, the picture is not much different. Whether it's handling dangerous chemicals or spending hours in front of furnaces, untrained workers ignorant of what they are handling face grave personal risks. And this does not include just obvious industrial accidents. Official estimates say that for every 10,000 workers, as many as 7,000 are injured every year and 75 die. Considering that over 300 million people make up the workforce, the number translated is enormous. But this is scarcely a true picture because accidents in the unorganized sector rarely get reported. And even if they do get noticed, occupational diseases or those caused by prolonged exposure to unsafe processes are never acknowledged. After all, unlike a serious accident or death on the job, occupational diseases develop over years, even decades. Shaman, a glass factory worker, is a good example. He spends over 8 hours each day in front of a furnace that hits temperatures of over 300 degrees centigrade. Lack of ventilation and a primitive production process imply increased exposure to pollution and susceptibility to disease. And yet, his only complaint is
खांसी ज़्यादा होती है और सांस लेने में परेशानी होती है और बदन में लपकन सी पैदा होती है गर्मी के टाइम.
To Shaman and others like him, their complaints seem trivial, and yet their seemingly minor health problems could well be the indications of a serious disease waiting to strike. Studies on the workers in Firozabad has in fact shown that an abnormally high number developed tuberculosis and other respiratory problems after working for many years.
It takes 10 to 15 years for a worker to develop all these symptoms when they become more visible. And after 15 years, it is very difficult for a worker to even remember what were the initial symptoms and how to relate with his occupation.
And nowhere is this more evident than in the mining industry. A study by the Indian Council of Medical Research revealed that 34% of workers in Bihar had silicosis and 45% pneumoconiosis. Both these afflictions develop over time and result from constant exposure to coal dust. It settles in the lungs and can over time result in cancer and ultimately death.
When the worker becomes a victim at the last stage, practically there is no cure, you see. Today what is happening is, when he reaches the last stage and when his lungs are unable to function, then workers are asked to retire.
But what about the over 40 million child labourers employed in the small-scale industries, where environmental safeguards are rarely priorities? Take the silk industry for example.
When they work in silk industry, from outside it appears that it is non-hazardous to the child. But in fact, it has a very adverse impact on the eyes and the respiratory system on the girl child, because mostly the girls are employed in silk industry.
Yet despite the growing incidence of occupational diseases, the management of offending industries refuse to accept accountability. This is what a glass factory owner had to say when asked whether furnace workers might be affected by the high temperatures and pollution.
ये तो हैबिचुअल भी हो जाते हैं और फिर अंदर से हीट जो होती है वो तो फर्नेस के अंदर ही रहती है. इन पर कोई असर हीट का नहीं होता है, कोई पोल्यूशन नहीं होता, कोई खतरा नहीं होता, किसी तरह का कोई परेशानी किसी को नहीं होती.
Such views are not surprising. After all, environmental safeguards would imply additional cost to the owners, and because labour in our country is cheap, new workers will always be found to replace those who have been wasted away. As a result, accountability for occupational hazards is an exception rather than a norm, particularly in the unorganized sector.
When workers are organized, if there is an accident or a major tragedy, they can ask questions. And even if there are cases of diseases, workers have doubt that why many workers are dying due to tuberculosis. So they can raise these questions with the management. But when you're working in a small scale industry, the level of awareness is not there. There is no union, no security of jobs.
Ironically, numerous laws and acts do exist to protect the worker. After the Bhopal tragedy, the Factories Act was amended to make it more effective. Today, it is mandatory for the management to make full disclosure about hazardous processes and maintain health records of workers. But it's obvious these are not taken seriously. Today, much is being spoken about how factories pollute surroundings.
They perch on telegraph wires, circle schools during recess time, and sometimes leave their droppings in inconvenient places. Birds are so much a part of our everyday lives that we never stop to wonder how they've adapted to our concrete jungles. Nandini Rajwade presents a bird's eye view of their fascinating world.
As we made our way from crowded Chandni Chowk in Old Delhi to a neatly tucked away red building, up a narrow staircase and inside a door on the first floor, the incessant twitter of birds grew louder and louder until it reached a crescendo. This is a bird hospital situated opposite Delhi's Red Fort. Said to be the only one of its kind in the world, it was set up in the 1940s by members of the Jain community. Not only does it offer free treatment to its patients, but also an assurance that the bird, once it has recovered, will be set free in its natural habitat. Whether it's dressing for a wound or a vitamin-rich diet for a quick recovery, the 5,000 patients here are administered to by a band of caring doctors and helpers. The only catch is that non-vegetarian birds like eagles, vultures and owls are not permitted entry because they would affect the sensibilities of the vegetarian Jain community. If you were to spend time in this heaven for afflicted birds, the thought of harming them would probably never cross your mind. And yet, India is second only to Senegal as far as the trade in birds is concerned. They are packed in suitcases to be transported and huge numbers die in transit. Even as many other countries ban this trade, India continues unabated. Much of the cruelty we perpetrate on birds is the result of superstition and misconception. For instance, many people believe that eating a bird cures paralysis, and pigeons are often trapped for this purpose. Of all the hurt and pain human beings usually bestow on birds, the use of slingshots or gulail has disastrous consequences. This bird was hit by a stone shot from a gulail and is battling for life in the intensive care unit. Doctors treat 15 to 20 such cases every day. Birds hurt by kite-flying thread, birds hurt in hunting, and birds injured by human experimentation. A visit to the brightly lit general ward helps dispel much of the pessimism that might have been generated so far. It is here that birds are left to recover before they finally take off on their own. These creatures do not live in our sensory world. In fact, they are brilliant at pattern recognition and have remarkable memories. They can also sense natural calamities and are known to migrate far before earthquakes occur. Besides, the expression bird brain, which is supposed to imply lack of mental development, is a misnomer. Birds are aware of the Earth's magnetic field and use it to find their way, sometimes across continents. So the next time you think dismissively about birds in general, think again. Of course, not everyone can replace the care, loving treatment, and a sense of hope birds receive at the hospital. And yet, greater sensitivity to one of nature's most enigmatic creatures will hurt no one. Our bodies may not be able to soar into the sky, but for a bird, flight is the essence of its being. And what better place to realize this than at the general ward? It is here that recovered birds fly to a 7 feet high perch, spread their wings, and become one with the sky on their way home to their favorite roosting spot.
At rest, a child under 3 inhales twice as much air per unit of body weight as an adult. Children therefore inhale more air pollution than adults do.